Hi, just a quick disclaimer before the video properly starts. I've noticed over the course of making these videos and interacting on several Endless Lore communities that there is a consensus that events and stories in Endless Space 1 that aren't referenced in Endless Space 2 have therefore been retconned out of existence or importance. I will be continuing in this video and all future videos as if this is not the case. I will be trying to marry the stories of all the games together as best I can. Hopefully, I can tell you all a good story, or more accurately, I can tell you the good story that the team at Amplitude Studios put together. Versatile, resilient, and driven, the countless billions of Imperial citizens stretch to touch every empire in the galaxy, leaving their fingerprints on the most distant planets, the most hidden cartels, and the most powerful of governments. Second to all in everything, but last in none, the United Empire has carved their place in the galaxy as quick scientists, ruthless warriors, methodical commanders, shrewd businessmen. There is nothing that the Empire truly struggles with. At the centre of the Empire is Raya, an industrial megacomplex of densely urbanised residential zones, swaths of ancient wilds supplanted by the greed and demands of corporations and their shareholders, and an exosphere accelerating towards a Kessler syndrome. Once a foothold of the old Mezari Empire, now the throne of the United Empire, and all citizens of every rank, no matter how far from their ancestral home they now reside, offer fealty to their supreme autocratic master, Emperor Maximilian Zelevas. The story of the Imperials can be segmented into three parts: the story of Raya, the story of the Empire, and the story of Zelevas. Obviously, all three will eventually intersect with the others, become integral to understanding them, and then divert. But as I said back in part 1, the story of humanity in the Endless Universe always returns to Raya, the Empire, and Emperor Zelevas. Untold millennia before the rise of the Empire, Raya was a medium-sized planet of Terran specification, a rather ordinary planet in the grand scheme of things. Beneath its surface, it was rich in trade-worthy and industrious minerals, making it at least somewhat notable to the Mezari settlers who set up the foundations of what would eventually become the Empire. During the Mezari control of Raya, the Endless would make contact and introduce the inhabitants to a few of the other species they had come to support in the galaxy. The only example that we have of how the Endless may have utilised the Rayan population is during the novella Last Flight of the Grey Owl, in which two Ryans are present on the planet Psychogogia at the outset of the Dust Wars. One of the Ryans dies during the attack, but one was able to escape aboard the Grey Owl. The refugees aboard the Grey Owl would then come to Auriga, where their story ends, at least in terms of this video. Even though the Empire came from the roots of the Mezari, they should not be thought of having progressed technologically, culturally, or socially. The same series of dreadful calamities that consumed the Mezari enveloped the inhabitants of Raya, it would seem. The stage of scientific progress that the Mezari had achieved before their downfall can be noted by the Volta's use of portals and the existence of true AI in the form of Opbot. The Mezari would fall from their position as masters of Raya as new cultural identities began to develop Although some families would seek to ensure that the Mezari bloodline survived to the current era of endless space, their numbers are minuscule in comparison, and individuals who claim descendancies are often objects of suspicion. We don't have enough information to explain the social and political changes during the Mezari downfall, but we do at least know how the inhabitants of Raya govern themselves in the current era. A massive conflict erupted in the dying days of the Mezari Empire, known as the Great Continental War. Each faction, more or less a representation of a nation, culture, corporation, or a collection of all three. Global conflict in an age of powerful scientific weaponry over the course of numerous decades or even centuries eventually resulted in a conglomeration, the Alliance of Nations, declaring victory and assuming control of Raya. The leader of the alliance was the Emperor, but not the Emperor we know. This is still at least a few centuries or more before the current era. The first Emperor we know of was Emperor Nikolai II, known as Steel Eyes, of the Hyvel dynasty. He is the earliest Emperor we know of, as he is the Emperor who brought the organization the Sheridan into existence. The Sheridan are the elite gold-clad bodyguards of the Emperor. Their purpose, to protect the Emperor from any and all harm. As time went on, their responsibilities evolved. To best protect the Emperor from threats against their life, the Sheridan developed a counter-intelligence division. To keep certain elements of the populace from promoting rebellious rhetoric, the Sheridan created a secret police division charitably called the Sheridan Military Police. As the wealth of the nation grew and the powers of corporations accelerated to match, the Sheridan began to closely study the economics and businesses of the empire. At some point during the Great Continental War, likely towards its end, Imperial spacefarers would encounter a fleet of Hisho ships in neutral space. Negotiations were short, if perhaps one-sided or non-existent, and the two fleets engaged in battle. After the skirmish was concluded, the Imperials emerged victorious. The Imperials were able to capture a vessel and return it to Raya, where the Hisho warriors were slowly reconditioned to support the Empire whilst maintaining the majority of their Hisho warrior culture. These Hisho would come to name themselves the Yusho. The lore is now going to sound very contradictory. According to the art book for Endless Space 1, Emperor Nikolai II founded the Sheridan a few decades after the conclusion of the Great Continental War and the founding of the Empire. Then, an undetermined amount of time later, the Sheridan would quietly support Zelevas' rise to the imperial throne by not protecting the reigning Emperor, Wilhelm Zinda. However, according to Hadrilenko's hero description, it is insinuated that the Great Continental War was still being fought a handful of decades ago, and in Lena Zelevas' hero description, Maximilian was a major figure during the war, especially in bringing it to a close by eliminating Duke Anatov during a battle appropriately named Anatov's Last Stand. Although Endless Space 2 is the most recently released Endless Universe game, at the moment that is, I don't think it would be fair to disregard the lore offered in Endless Space 1. Instead, it might require rejigging, timescales changing, and meta-history rewriting. We know the United Empire under Maximilian Zelevas makes use of re-education camps, so it's not such a stretch to imagine that some events have become distorted or intertwined. During research for the Pilgrims video, I saw mention of a First Separation War. Again, the events didn't make sense to me. When the resistance defected from the Empire, the war began, and well, it's still technically going on. However, there are more references to the Second Separation War in the Pilgrim's Law, which would make it a later war than the first, obviously, and therefore the current conflict. The Great Continental War, by its very name, suggests that it is a war fought primarily on the soils of Raya, not out in space chasing down some rebels. Emperor Zelevas, in the first chapter of the Empire's Endless Space 2 questline, remarks that he now feels more secure in his position now that rebellious elements have been eliminated, probably referring to Duke Anatov and or Grand Admiral Gavril, another dissident who was killed in the comic The Cleaner. So I was confused. If Emperor Maximilian Zelevas is a major figure during the Great Continental War, how can his ascension be considered a bloodless coup, as described in Endless Space 1? Although the term bloodless coup is often not literal, a war spanning the entirety of Raya wouldn't normally be called bloodless. If the United Empire is formed at the conclusion of the Great Continental War, why is one of the major enemies of the Alliance of Nations called a Duke? If Duke Anatov were an independent belligerent in the war, would he not have taken on a more total title, like King, Commander, Supreme Master, for example? Even those close to him, like Lena Zelevas, Maximilian's younger sister, knew him as Duke Anatov. If the Sheridan are formed a few decades after the conclusion of the Great Continental War, how is it that Hadrilenko, the current first protector of the Sheridan, has been fighting alongside Zelevas for 30 years during the Great Continental War? How could Emperor Nikolai II have founded them when the war hasn't been over long enough to admit the Sheridan's founding, as well as 3 emperors at least before Zelevas? Well, I think I have a theory. The Great Continental War was not one war, but rather a series of nations at war with each other over a significant span of time. The war itself was always happening, but the nations were not always at war with everyone at the same time. Otherwise, Raya might look less like a sprawling industrial zone, and more like Chinami or Husk. Think of it like how we might one day refer to every war that took place in our recent history as the Great World War. That is, once the world is governed as a single nation and re-education takes hold. The Alliance of Nations, the precursor to the United Empire, was governed by dynasties of emperors, the last of which was Emperor Willem Zinder. Duke Anatov, I believe, was a staunch supporter of the status quo, and when the emperor was deposed by Maximilian Zelevas, Anatov led the resistance against the new emperor. This, therefore, could be seen as the first separation war, especially from the perspective of loyalists to Emperor Zelevas. The Sheridan were indeed established by Emperor Nikolai II a few decades after the conclusion of part of the Great Continental War, but as mentioned earlier, per Maximilian Zelevas' ascension to the imperial throne, the Sheridan adopted an independent, hybrid function within the government, with Oread Svetlov as their faction ruler. Their role has shifted so significantly that some Sheridan operatives, such as Tethys, have abandoned the military order entirely. To current-day Imperial citizens, Duke Anatov's true nature as a great enemy of the Alliance of Nations was revealed when he rebelled against Emperor Zelevas, and he was roundly destroyed, concluding the Great Continental War and enabling Zelevas to declare a new regime for a new age of discovery and domination, the United Empire. Why would Duke Anatov rebel, though? Well, Duke Anatov knew Maximilian Zelevas very well, as Anatov was Zelevas' brother-in-law. Not only was Zelevas a well-known figure in Emperor Wilhelmzinder's court, he was also the incredibly successful and infamous CEO of Xenomine Corporation. We get a glimpse of how diplomatic their approaches to native populations were and, well, still are, in the United Empire introductory video from Endless Space 2. In societies with tight bloodlines, the nobility or upper class will often practice arranged marriages for the sake of forging alliances, securing genetic benefits, or as a clause in a business deal. For whatever reason, maybe even for love, Lena Zelevas was married to Duke Anatov. Perhaps Duke Anatov, now closer to the ultra-rich Maximilian, foresaw the conditions of the people of Raya and the galaxy if he should claim ultimate power. Unfortunately, this came to be, and Duke Anatov was unable to resist the vicious ruthlessness of Emperor Maximilian Zelevas. Hadrilenko, the Emperor's first protector, was present in the squad that stormed Duke Anatov's final bastion and recovered Lena Zelevas and her twin daughters, Victoria and Julinka. Duke Anatov's resistance was destroyed, the First Separation War was concluded, and in the mind of Emperor Maximilian Zelevas, all opponents have been brought to heel, executed, or have fled to distant parts of the galaxy. In reality though, Hadri and Lena have sent Julinka with members of the Resistance to a planet that would come to be known as Traitor's Reach, setting in motion the events of the United Empire questline of Endless Space 2. Hadri would return to Emperor Zelevas' side to serve as first protector, while his commander, Grandmaster Oryad Svetlov, worked to further increase the Sheridans' influence of power in the new regime so that one day they could potentially overthrow the Emperor and govern Raya as they see fit. Lena, with the unending affection of Hadrilenko, her brother's closest confidant, remains a quiet observer and outward supporter of her brother's regime, although she can often seem a little bitter and cold. She finds comfort in her religion, a peculiarity in the irreligious United Empire, and tattoos her face as a show of devotion to her deities and those of her faith. The United Empire, although rigid and stable on the surface, bubbles with numerous seditious plans that, under Emperor Zelevas, either are totally quashed or are given financial incentive to leave and never return. Although Emperor Zelevas believes himself to be an exceptionally talented and brilliant man, the reality of the galactic stage, its variety and vastness, means he cannot hold sole control over all things. It would seem that for each part of the Empire he loosens his grip, his paranoia amplifies, and his need for his citizens to know he is their master grows. Those of the nobility can find themselves awarded with fiefdoms in the form of far-flung planets, their potential and value free for them to exploit. Despite each planet and their governor being all but independent, their fealty is still to the Emperor, and a massive fleet of utilitarian ships helmed by the most brilliant minds of the Empire and manned by a seemingly endless number of soldiers discourages most from considering secession or even offering constructive criticism. Those of lesser birth, the lesser millions, billions, perhaps trillions of the galaxy, are kept in a state of bleak contentment or total fear of the power of the Emperor. They work each day to make the cities, weapons and ships that empower the Empire, as the soldiers that keep the borders safe and local populations compliant, as the daggers that silence dissonant voices, as the listeners that whisper the secrets to their masters, as the nameless horde fed to and feeding the machine that keeps the Empire fueled. Humanity has stretched far across the galaxy. Remnants of the old Mezari bloodlines are reclaiming their place among the stars, awakening after a centuries-long slumber after an exodus from their doomed homeworld. Meanwhile, the ancient, most beautiful of oligarchs still battle amongst themselves to claim the right to the title Horatio Prime, beautifying the galaxy one spliced gene at a time. The resistance of the United Empire may have been cast out to the furthest reaches of the galaxy, but their pilgrimage to unearth more endless artifacts and uncover the location of Tor is nearing its conclusion, with dozens of ancient endless factories springing into life, and more of the galaxy being mapped. But the Empire is always close behind, chasing the resistance to ground and ensuring that all of the species of the galaxy know of its total and unquestionable supremacy. All achievements of the Empire are the Emperor's, and all ground gained, treaties signed, businesses bought, regimes destroyed, belong to the Emperor as well. Humanity is wide and diverse, and the endless universe will not see them gone anytime soon.